Well, welcome everyone, and I think we have new guests. Obviously, not I think I know we have new guests here with us today. We're going to hear about from our first panel from Michael Corey and Matt Havish. We're going to talk about food security, and then panel 2 we'll talk about housing, specifically affordable housing. Commissioner O'Grady, you were not with us last when we met last week. Would you like to say a few words to the Recovery and Resiliency Advisory Committee? If so, the floor is yours.
Well, hello everybody. Glad to be here. Trying to mute my phone here since I'm getting blown up right now. It is good to be a part of this group. Looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to being a part of helping this economy recover. We had a lot going for us before the pandemic started here in Central Ohio, and we have a lot to look forward to. But in the meantime, we've been spending a lot of time in Franklin County helping folks to make it through, helping folks to recover, and helping folks to deal with all that has been thrown at them over the last 8 or 9 months. And so now we're looking forward to helping folks deal with the winter, the coming winter, helping folks deal with the impending holidays, and then helping folks looking forward to 2021 and all that it brings, including hopefully turning the corner on this virus and getting our lives back to where we need to be. So thank you, everybody, for agreeing to be a part of this, and looking forward to some good work. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Hannah, are we ready with the slide, or do you want to move forward with the panel?
Let's go forward with the panel because it is not letting me share. So let me troubleshoot, and we'll come back to it.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Thank you. As I've already done introductions, we want to turn it over to our panelists, Michael Corey and Matt Havish. Michael Corey is the Executive Director of the Franklin County Human Service Chamber. The chamber of, organization of human service organizations. We're well over 100 members now. Michael has been in this role for, I think, just about 3 years. I think you started in your role just before I started here at YWCA Columbus, and is doing a fabulous job. He does all things advocacy for human services, but also, helps us think creatively. It does some blue sky thinking with us. I say us because we are a member of the chamber. As we think about service delivery in this, Matt Havish is no stranger to anyone on this call. Matt serves as the president and CEO of the Mid-Ohio Food Collective. They've changed their name, and I have to say it 3 times to make sure I get it right every time. Matt has done a number of things in this community. He's run another nonprofit organization, St. Stephen's in particular, been at the food bank for quite some time. And of course, many of you know, at one point served as a member of Columbus City Council and as council president in the early 2000s. Welcome, Michael, and welcome, Matt. And we will turn the floor over to you to talk about food security.
Thank you, Christy. I have been honored to be in this role, and one of the best elements of this job is that I get to defer to much smarter people than I am, and that especially includes the 2 of you. So I'll start by deferring to Matt to get us started here with these presentations.
Great, thanks, Michael. And I told Michael this privately, but he has done a phenomenal job as the director of the Human Service Chamber. He really has, and he's been on it from a lot of perspectives, and he's made our lives a lot easier with some of the things he's been able to locate for us, particularly around any PPE kinds of activities and things we need to be doing and making sure people are staying safe. So it's become a big part of our work. So thank you, Michael. As we begin, I'm going to give you an overview of numbers. I was going to do this in slides, but I hate doing slide presentations. So I'm just going to talk through some of this just to give you a sense of what happened. For us, this all began March 1st. As the governor was talking about and debating with some of the people on this call about closing down the Arnold, we pulled our disaster plan together. That we have food banks do a lot of disaster work, but it's usually what you see going on in California with fires and hurricanes and those kinds of events. And we are usually in a supportive role to another food bank. but we do have a disaster plan. We immediately pulled it out. We got way ahead of a lot of the other food banks in the country, thanks to a lot of support. Locally ordered, and we normally, up until that point, from July to March, we had ordered like 50. As of, in March and April, we ordered and ended up well over 130 truckloads of food and other products. We were looking for, like everybody else, for toilet paper. We managed to secure some. It had Spanish labeling on it, but we figured everybody knew what to do with it. It wasn't going to be a challenge. But we really started to step up. Our distribution, it goes up and down by month, but on average, it's up 26% from last year. So we're continuing to see those numbers. Our fresh food, even with all of this going on and the no-touch rules and all the safety rules that we've put in place, we've had to abandon our choice shopping models and inside of our big pantries, including ours here at the food bank in Grove City, and have gone to a no-touch model and literally put it in the trunk of the car. We quickly developed a software app that tied into our pantry track data system that allowed people to register for that. Now they can register ahead of time, but at that time it gave us a no-touch strategy, even when we needed electronic signatures for handing out some of the government foods. All of those things quickly got put into place, and we're still running 19% higher on our fresh food distribution, which normally would be a produce market where somebody could come pick their own foods. We've had to adapt that and pre-pack things. The amazing help we got from the very early stages with the governor was around having the National Guard deployed to us. When we started talking to the 12 food banks in Ohio in March, everybody says, let's ask. And they went around, did a round robin, and everybody said, well, how many do you need? People were saying 5, 10, 15. I said, I need 100. And I got 100. And we had 100 soldiers, men and women, who have been a phenomenal asset to us. They keep extending their deployment. We're down to about 50 now, but as of through August, we had 100. And they're scheduled to leave in mid-December unless the governor and the feds extend that beyond. We've now begun a strategy because we had to give up all of our volunteers. We have 13,000 volunteers that show up in any given year and put in about 71,000 hours of time. And, we think first about the seniors who have to stay home, but more than 50% of our volunteers are corporate volunteer groups. And they were all being, told to stay home. So we quickly used the Guard. Most recently with some of the great help we've gotten from both the city and the county and the CARES Act money, we've hired a number of people to come in and be temporary workers with us. I imagine some of those are going to become full-time workers as we continue to explore what that looks like. And we've got some volunteers coming back. The Guards folks, they immediately packed 27,000 emergency boxes in the first couple of weeks they were here with that food, so that we could distribute that at where we needed it, thinking our agencies were going to close. We've had an amazingly strong resiliency, and 95% of our agencies have stayed open. I can contrast that with you with Las Vegas, where 83% of their agencies closed. So our partners stayed open. We taught them a lot about safe handling as we were learning it. We were learning with the Guard how to do all of that. We run distributions in some of our outlying counties. I don't know whether everybody in this call knows, but we have a 20-county service area, and I'll talk a little bit about the breakout of that in a minute and how that's shifted throughout all of this. But they've done deliveries in rural counties to senior centers where the senior centers closed. They've been doing distributions in Marion and Marysville with us. They started out helping us do all the meal delivery that we were doing in downtown Columbus. One of the things we got asked to do real quickly with the shelter board, as they were having to deconcentrate the shelters and set up quarantine sites and COVID sites, et cetera, with the YMCA in particular, we started cooking. We took our staff that was cooking meals at the Reeve Avenue Center when it shut down. There's a lot of after-school meal programs, and said, okay, we'll keep you all employed. Start cooking meals to take to the homeless, and as we were identifying where those locations were. And we're continuing to do that. We've done that since the beginning of COVID, and we will continue that on into 21 now as those sites. Because one of the things that happened was Faith Mission has done a wonderful job with their community kitchen downtown, of feeding people that were living in the single residencies, in the Y. And because of COVID, they had to shut that down to external folks. So we quickly decided that we had to go set up in a parking lot and distribute food out of a parking lot, and we're still doing that today. That got a little tricky during some of the unrest, and so we started to use our own staff just because of the issues of having soldiers to do that and some of the challenges we were having in the community due to the social unrest. They've helped us pack over 3 million pounds of food. Now, to give you a perspective, with 20 counties, as I said, we've had 806,000 service visits, meaning somebody showed up at a pantry or distribution somewhere across our 20 county footprint. 509,000 of those were in Franklin County. Historically, in all the years, we were normally a 50-50 split. 50% of what we do is Franklin County volume, 50% is the other 19 counties. We're now on service visits running 63% of those visits are in Franklin County. So you can see from the job losses that have gone on inside the major urban community of our 20 county footprint that more and more people are needing help. One of the things that we really saw in all of that, and we track every day because of our data tracking system, is how many new families. And again, these numbers, they're even more stark to Franklin County because we've had 44,000 new families since March 1st. A new family means they've never, ever, even once asked for help in 10 years that we've been collecting data, on the customers that we serve. 29,000, almost 27 or 30,000 of those are in Franklin County. It's over 67% of all of the new families that we have served are right here in Franklin County. So we've been really working with families. And I think if there's a message to get out to everybody, there was an amazing story a few weeks ago about resiliency in a family that USA Today wrote with the Columbus Dispatch around a family in the north side of town. She was a former military vet in the Marines, if I'm remembering right. Both her and her husband lost their job. They have a child with some special needs. The only discouraging piece, and they were trying everything. I mean, when you read that article, they're buying the supplies, they're doing detailing of cars to make some money. They were doing all these things to survive and have income. But one of the things she did was she prioritized food first and her spend, when she got the $1,200 check, those kind of things. She didn't qualify for SNAP. She didn't qualify, for some of the $600 kinds of things. So, but the concern that I have, because from the very beginning, we said, if you need food, come get it. And that's the message we want to leave with everybody, because we're taking a multi-year approach to how long this is going to last. I was here during the recession, obviously, 10, 12 years ago, as we went through all of that. And it took a very long time for people to recover. We're going to see that same thing again. So, we just ordered another 100 truckloads of food last week to get us through, actually to keep us going for now, but more so after the first of the year. So that we will continue to have food. And we want to tell people to do that. As you're prioritizing limited budgets, then, let's make sure you can access food. And one of the shifts that we're doing as we build out our Mid-Ohio market strategy, which is a new name for a destigmatized, centralized, big hub food pantry. Just think of it that way. Multi-services, big buildings, open a lot of hours. And as we prioritize those, we want people coming, as often as they need to, take what they can use every week, and that's the new model, because the old model of food pantries, and still the model in a lot of cases across the country, is you come at the end of the month when you're out of food. And we're now saying, no, we have fresh food. Come shop our operations first, then go to the grocery store and get the items we don't have. Stretch your dollars, but if you have to pay rent, you got to pay utilities, pay those things. And make sure, and we have the resources. The government's been very supportive. Took a long time. That's why we ordered all that food in the beginning. We are not charging for any of that food. You hear the food bank charges. We're giving that food to our customers, to our agencies to give out. Got a lot of trade mitigation food that has come in as well. And that's basically all the trade issues going on internationally. And when they can't sell it, food banks usually get it in some form or another. At one point, it was garbanzo beans, and I mean semi-loads on top of semi-loads, split peas, lentil. We found a great use for lentils with all the new Americans we have here. That's a staple to their diet, so we were able to distribute those. Then after that, it was a lot of really good food that's more mainstream. But the stimulus packages, we knew back in March, April, that food wasn't going to hit till July, August, September. It's going to take government a long time, and they were competing in the marketplace for the food. And so we fortunately had private food to come in first, then the government food. The trade mitigation was already going on. The infamous box program of USDA, which has been a real challenge. but still provided good food. Those programs, the box program and the trade mitigation end. They're going to end in the next 30 days. So going into 21, we're going to continue, and hopefully, it looks like we have a new administration coming in, and we can sit down and talk about what does that look like going forward. Because I'm looking at a 3 to 5 year runway. For us to really see everything, start to settle down, what the new job situation looks like in this community, how we can partner more with all of the human service organizations to make sure that people have access to food from our work as we try to move them out of poverty. And ultimately, for us, that means they can get them moving out of hunger as they get a higher paying job. We were on trajectory, as Commissioner O'Grady said, we were doing great things. And we were on a trajectory where more people were buying their own food with their own money because wages were ticking up. They weren't ticking up to kick you above 200% of poverty, which is roughly $40,000 for a family of 3. But they were ticking up. And then this, all the job loss that's occurred. And it's been a particularly hard hit here in Franklin County. So we're paying very close attention to the kids, and making sure we partnered a lot with the schools in the early. We have 101 school districts in our 20 county footprint, and we're tracking all of them. We've had a lot of calls saying, who's doing hybrid, who's doing what do you need, where are your distributions, how can we complement that distribution of food the school's doing with fresh food and pre-bagging it and making it easy. Great partnership with Columbus Recreation and Parks. They've been doing wonderful working partnerships with us. So a lot of that's going to continue as we go forward because it's just going to take a long time. We've served over 50,000 households with children, and it's continued to 103,000 kids between 5 and 17 have been served since March. To give you a sense of scale and what's happened, even our pantry here on site, which was originally designed to be a learning lab and small scale, it grew, and we were doing 250 to 300 families in a 3 to 4 hour shift on a day we were open, and we're now doing 800 to 850 families. So people are coming here. They're coming from all over the county. We got food. The bad news is they got to drive to Grove City. The good news is that highway's getting fixed. So it's a little easier and there aren't as many cars on it. But the bad news is they still have to drive the distance. But I want to assure everybody, as we're thinking about economic recovery, we want to make sure that, we were down a path of really looking at ourselves as a low-cost, high-value healthcare strategy, partnering with Primary One Health and, and a number of the FQHCs, tracking data, and from getting people to come more often, getting regular access to fresh fruits and vegetables. We're one of the 5th or 6th largest produce distributing food bank in the United States out of the 200 food banks that are part of the Feeding America network. So it's in that space that we're going to continue. We're going to continue to cook meals. We have cooked 370,000 meals out of our kitchen here in Grove City and distributed those, and about 170,000 of those have gone to homeless shelters. But we've done a lot of other kids' meals programs and other sites, as well as we're even cooking for the Guard while they're here so that they don't have to worry about going anywhere and eating. So that's the context of where we are. If I leave you with one thing, is we've made great plans with the generosity of the CARES Act dollars that we've had first from the community here, as well as our private donations. So we will be in good shape for food going through 21. So that's the assurance I have in terms of what's coming. We hope there's more government food, because if the government food comes in 21, it takes our private dollars and lets us stretch them even further into 22. And that's the idea for us, is how far can we stretch the generosity that, whether it was government support or private generosity, to allow us to continue this for as a multi-year strategy. With that, I'll pause.
Thank you, Matt. Michael, Corey, your thoughts?
Yeah. First, let me just pause and say how fortunate we all are to have Matt in this position at this time. I'd argue that no community or region in the country has had a better response from a food bank than we've had in the Columbus region, thanks to Matt and his team. And that has been true since well before even the federal government was acknowledging the threat that COVID was going to pose to us. So I think we're all very fortunate for your continued leadership. The voluminous and quantifiable nature of your report will contrast to what I want to share a little bit. So what I did, and first let me say, at the Chamber, we represent and serve 102 health and human services, nonprofit organizations, in a wide range of areas. And what I wanted to do in sharing with this group was ask the full membership, if you're in the food space right now, tell me what you're up to and tell me what you were up to a year ago. And that's obviously not a scientific and data concrete way of approaching things, but I thought it would be an interesting way of sharing this with you. I got about 25 responses, some from agencies that have been in the food space for a long time, like Life Care Alliance, and about a third that hadn't been in the food space before March of 2020. And what I wanted to share with that was to demonstrate the resiliency and the responsiveness of the nonprofit sector to help the community. And I'll be honest with you, reading through the reports I got from all these agencies in the amount of good that they're doing and the amount of suffering they're trying to alleviate is very moving. And I'm just very grateful to so many of you on this call, on this committee that are doing that work, and all of you that are going to be contributing to the work that we do collectively in the hard months ahead. Let me share a few takeaways from the breadth of the responses that I received, and I'll tell you too that I'll put all of this information into a PDF report and share with the committee so you have it in front of you. But a few general takeaways. The amount of food being distributed, and I'm sure that almost all of it, if not all of it, is originating with the food bank's work. The needs have risen considerably, and the amount of food being distributed, the number of individuals and families being served have risen considerably. And that is true of both the agencies in the food space for the first time and those agencies that have been in the food space for a long time. Second, I wanted to give you a few anecdotal numbers to demonstrate that. At Muslim Family Services, for example, prior to COVID, they were serving about 200 people per week. Right now, they're serving about 350 people per week. In 2021, they're bracing to serve about 425 people per week. One little sliver of an example of the uptick and how that's expected to sustain and increase into next year. At Community Refugee Immigration Services, they had no food services prior to this crisis. From August to October alone, they've delivered over 1,000 boxes of meals to people, and they expect that going into next year, they'll be delivering 150 boxes per month to people in need. At Directions for Youth and Families, they were providing snacks in an after-school program to about 200 youth on a regular basis. Since March in 2020, they've been providing lunch and dinner, a total of 6,000 meals, Monday through Friday, not only to youth, but to their families, trying to meet that need. At Lutheran Social Services, their services are up 14% just in getting food out the door from last year to this year, with a sharp increase in first-time households seeking their help. At Bishop Griffin Resource Center on the east side, their service, the number of people has almost doubled one year to the next. And at Life Care Alliance, they have a number of programs in the food space, obviously. They have a pantry available just for those with cancer and their families. Last year, they served about 1,000 families. Since March, they've served over 1,500. And through Meals on Wheels, they've gone from delivering 15,000 meals per week to 25,000 meals per week to 6,000 people. There are many, many more data points to share and anecdotes to share from all these agencies, but I wanted to give you that collective sense that the breadth of the sector is trying to step up and get food out the door, and they're able to do so in large part, again, because of the work that Matt and his team are doing. I wanted to take a step back, too, and talk about the strain on a lot of these organizations from a business perspective, and give you some data there. So the week before the election, which feels like a year ago, Governor DeWine reached out to us and wanted to meet with our membership. So to assist with that convening, we sent out a very pedestrian survey to our 102 agencies and said, tell us how much money you have not realized in revenue due to COVID since March, and tell us how much money you've had to spend due to COVID since March. We heard from 62 of our agencies, and over $61 million in revenues have been lost or not realized, and over $21 million in revenues have been created due to COVID since March. That's an enormous figure, and certainly not representative of the whole. And I share that to underscore the enormity of the business challenge that this is placing on the sector. The second element I wanted to share here is what I've been telling our elected officials for the last 6 weeks, and we're here now, that we've been bracing for a three-headed monster in November and December. And unfortunately, each of those heads has very much arrived with us. The first was a spike in COVID diagnoses, putting enormous strain on the hospitals as well as the health and human services nonprofits. The second is the federal supports through the CARES Act drying up or being exhausted. And notably, if you're not aware, any money that came out through the CARES Act to agencies has to be spent before the end of the year. So the utility of those dollars is somewhat limited in that regard. That's also included PPP, which was enormously beneficial to the nonprofit sector, and certainly all of the direct supports to people of our community that without those supports are going to be turning to our sector even more so. And we're beginning to see that uptick in need as we speak. And that is intertwined with number three, which was the constitutional crisis that we forecast, and we're amidst it right now. Those are intertwined because with the lack of acknowledgement, shall we say, of the reality of the election, I think we're less and less likely to see a lame duck stimulus package pass, which is what so many of us were hoping for and anticipating. And quite frankly, on both sides of the aisle, including from Senator Brown and Senator Portman's offices, we had assurances up to November 2nd that there was going to be a significant push for a bipartisan stimulus package once Congress got back to work this week. I do not see that happening while we're debating whether or not there was rampant fraud in this presidential election. So we're here in the thick of it. And our significant concern for all these agencies, those providing food and those not, is that all of this is intertwined. We need the sector to be strong, and if we're missing out on one element, we're missing out on many elements. We all need to be strong. So there's going to need to be a congressional spigot opening back up, because that's the only spigot big enough to keep things moving in the direction we need them to be moving. But we are very, very fortunate that food has not been the enormous challenge here because of the enormous work of so many individual agencies and certainly of partners in government and business and philanthropy and food collective. But we're going to need help because it's going to get a lot harder in the months to come.
Thank you, Michael. I now want to turn to our advisory committee and give people an opportunity to ask questions. So I will open up the floor to the committee.
Christy, this is Sandy. I don't know if you want us to just jump in like this, or I was
Yes,
trying to find my little.
That's easiest. There's no raise your hand. There's no raise your hand button. So.
Okay. So just real quickly, first of all, I really appreciate the presentation from both Matt and Michael. And here's a question for you as we go forward, as we're thinking about, as a committee, our role and what we can do to help. One of the experiences that we had in the 2008 recession in the world of homelessness is that our numbers rose significantly, as you might expect. But what became, I think, the unfortunate surprise about that is they never went back down. And so it was almost like we achieved a new plateau of what to expect in our community with homelessness, which was really unfortunate. And part of it might be population growth. Part of it might just be how difficult it is to recover from job loss and so forth. But knowing we had hit a new plateau and that was our new normal around the difficulty of the recession impact on the community, here we go again into what I'm concerned about could be yet another potential peak or plateau, so to speak, going forward with how this community is handling this. And I'm curious from your standpoint, if you feel that what you're addressing now in terms of food security and food distribution is going to be the way it will be going forward, even as we come out of economic recovery, or if you actually see that there will be economic recovery that brings that need down. Do you understand what I'm asking? I know it's a little bit complicated, but I'm trying to level set in my head, you know, what we're dealing with kind of going forward, knowing what happened last time.
I'll take a stab at some of that. And just my sense is one of the things that's happened with this, the federal ruling was that we've kicked the can down the road to January on the eviction process into the middle of the winter, which is not bode really well. So I'm assuming that's going to get kicked the can further, which puts a big pressure on the landlords at that point in time to pay their mortgages if they don't have income coming in. So I think you could see more unrest there. What's going to happen to all the restaurants, you know, as we all we don't get to enjoy these kind of days and it turns cold and all that outdoor eating goes away, you know, so I think the restaurant industry is going to be one that we're going to have to keep. That's a lot of people getting employed. You know, I think the thing to keep in mind from, you know, and I heard Jeff Beal right the other day, you know, we're building X number of housing units, affordable housing units, but we're really short 50,000. You know, so there's a serious, and as the market gets tighter and tighter, that just drives rents up, you know, which is the number one issue. I think, you know, from my stabilizing family strategy, that, you know, do you have a safe place for the family to live that's clean and affordable? So that's where you start. So for me, those are all big issues. They were big issues pre-COVID. COVID's just made it worse. And we're going to have to be very mindful. I mean, I forget the statistics, something like 43% of America pre-COVID was making $15 an hour or less. So there's your income stat right off the bat, unless there's not enough revenue to pay the bills. So I think it's in that space that we're going to continue to struggle, you know, and the better we can get an economic forecast from all the people that do that and understand the jobs numbers, that's going to help. Where are the jobs? Who's creating them in the future? What do they look like? And are we skilling up for those jobs in a way that people are going to be able to access them? So it's kind of like some employers can't find workers right now, and other employers, you know, they're hurting and they don't have enough work. So I think it's going to be a mixed bag. You know, at the end of the day, there's not going to be one good indicator, but building out a community information exchange, which is one thing we're working really hard on, so that we can share population kinds of information with people, zip code by zip code, region by, in our case, census tract by census tract, or block tract inside a census tract, so we can really see that. I think those are the kinds of things that, you know, what is the strength of this region? How do we build off those strengths? And where do we look, where's the need to shore up employment opportunities for people so that they can have their own money to pay their own bills? I'm not sure how helpful that was, Sandy, but that's kind of like, you know, what we're seeing is that's why I just have conditioned our team. There's a very long runway here. You know, I've had board meetings. Ariana's on my board, and, you know, we had calls all morning around finance and other governance issues, getting ready for our board meeting. And I just said, look, this is you know, I just keep telling people 3 years plus, you know, it's that level of runway depending on how much more severe it gets. I think this is going to be worse than a recession, you know, because that was a typical downturn and it had its consequences. There's a lot of shifting. How many people now order food online? How many people now order products online? What's that do to retailers? You know, all of that, and we're such a heavy retail kind of industry. What does that ultimately do to the economy here? And what's going to replace those kind of retailers, you know, is one of the things we're going to have to keep paying attention to.
And Matt, one of the things we heard last week, and everyone will recall this, we heard that, you know, some people didn't recover from the last recession. Therefore, as we think about our work, we have to almost go back to that recession and where people were, not start, you know, where we are today or where we were just pre-COVID, because some people, Black and brown people in particular, they didn't recover well from the last recession. And so the one question I just wanted to ask this quickly, do you have the demographics on those that are getting food? I know you mentioned, you know, zip code and census tract data, but do you also have the other demographics, race and ethnicity?
We do not right now, because the current model is that when a person comes in to get food, their data is put in by a social service agency, and they're not asking complete demographic questions. There's a lot of uncomfortableness when you got a volunteer being your intake system. We don't ask income because we're not allowed per some of our federal rules. The nice thing is what we've done, and it'll be available. Our new name of Pantry Track, which is our data collection, is now Fresh Track. And as Fresh Track gets moved out into the system, it's a put it in your hands of the person to put their own data into that. It's think building your LinkedIn profile, and you get that little bar that tells you how much yours is complete. They're going to be able to self-populate that themselves. To give you an example, we partnered, we do this all over Ohio with our system, and Cleveland was registered, and they have a weekly giveaway at one of their Muni centers up there, the lots, and they registered with our new system 3,000 people. So as people build that out themselves versus if you try to register 3,000 people to Pantry, it'd take you a long, long time. And so the idea for us is we are going to build that into the future of the database. That'll be in the information exchange. And the faster we get that implemented, and we encourage people to self-report. If they don't have to fill it out, but if they do, the more we get it, the more we're going to have that. Like we're even asking, who's your healthcare provider? If you're on Medicaid. So we learn all of that as we build these partnerships. So I'm excited about where we're going. Unfortunately, we don't have good demographic data because volunteers are real uncomfortable asking questions, even though the system will collect it.
Okay, thank you.
And to add to that a little bit, we have some agencies that did share their demographic data with us. I can't speak to the consistency across the questions that are posed by individual agencies about it, but I'll pull that into the report that I prepare for the committee as well. So you can see it for at least some of the agencies that shared that. To the broader question that Sandy posed, one of the things that is beneficial as we move into the next administration is that we can go from playing defense when it comes to food programs to offense. We've spent much of the last 4 years saying, please no, don't cut food stamps, don't make it harder to access food, don't make it harder to access government services on a range of fronts. And we've had great bipartisan support from our congressional delegation in defense of those programs. One of the things that we know to a certainty with the Biden administration and a new series of cabinet leaders is that we'll be able to expand programs like this and not have to play so much defense. So that'll be to our benefit. The other element to all of this is the scientific cavalry is coming when it comes to the coronavirus. It's just going to be a matter of time and efficacy and logistics and distribution and embracing. And as the public health element of all this gets better, the economic one will too. But as Matt said, there are just so many unknowns and so many moving parts that history is no longer going to be a reliable indicator of how we would come out of this recession because so many elements are going to shift underneath our feet and we won't know about it until a year from now. We're also not accounting for educational loss and the consequences we might have there on health and economic outcomes too. So there are so many unknown factors right now. But as Dr. Acton told the chamber membership a couple weeks ago, we just have to get through winter and we'll know a heck of a lot more then. And the scientific cavalry will be there and will hopefully be moving forward on a number of fronts, again, on offense at that point.
Thank you. Other questions from the advisory committee?
I have a question. So you guys did a great job kind of detailing the increase in requests for services from our community to access food. And my question is, how have you been able to meet all of the need that you've had? And how do you believe that there are people who are unaware of the services available? So do you have an idea of those who might need the service that have not taken advantage of the service? So as we kind of are coming into this three-headed monster and knowing that there's a potential for increase just by nature of the situation that we're in, are there folks who needed the help previously who either didn't know about it or where to get it, or for whatever reason it wasn't there or available to them?
I think the answer to that is yes, in the sense that our numbers are going back up. The people that, when you got 40,000 people, or now I just looked at the new numbers in Franklin County, we've crossed over the 30,000 family mark that have never asked for help before. Learning how to get help, and being able, and getting over the stigma of walking into a food pantry. That is hard. Hence why we're rebranding Mid-Ohio Markets, trying to give them a grocery store feel post-COVID, so people feel welcome. So I think there's an issue. That story I told about what was in the dispatch was concerning to me, because the last thing she should have been prioritizing her spend on was food. Because the other issues, when you don't pay your utility bills, you're going to have a reckoning at some point. You don't pay your rent, you're going to get evicted, that kind of thing. So really encouraging people. We have, to answer the first part of your question, to my knowledge, we have not run out of food anywhere. We have a stocked warehouse. I mean, we have a second warehouse that we've rented to continue to fill it up. And we have regular shipments of produce coming and that's getting out to people. So the food is at our locations. Now, whether people are taking advantage of that and understand, because we go up to now 230% of poverty. One of the challenges in all this is that doesn't mean much to most of you, because you don't live in the world that I live in, and I can equate that to dollars per month or per year on salaries. But if SNAP stops at 130%, the greatest thing we could do with SNAP is put it on the sliding scale that daycare has, and get it up so that it works right along with the employer, that you don't have somebody saying, I can't work more hours, I can't take, because a little bit more money in a paycheck is going to mean I fall off a benefit cliff somewhere, and it's a big cliff. So the private sector is the only food above 130%, except for WIC, which is the Women and Children Program at 185. But the vast majority of people that need food, but we're now still eligible to go up to 230%. We can serve people beyond that if they need them. We can't use certain foods. Government food's got a cap. All my private sector food does not. If they deem their food insecure, we can do what we need to do. So I just wanted to assure people we have food. We bought a lot of it because of the generosity of the community and the support of all the elected officials who gave us CARES Act money from this community. That's what's enabled us to get it. And we're way ahead. We just did a thing that I talked to 12 of my biggest food banks around the country, and nobody did what we did, which ordered another 100 truckloads of product. And I said, I'm really worried in 21 what's going to happen, because if this eviction thing happens, all of those things are going to manifest. But Christy's absolutely, this was all going on pre-COVID. The housing crisis exists, the sheltering crisis exists, the food insecurity numbers were high, and the recession from 12 years ago, we went up to about 400,000 people, roughly a third of Franklin County living below 200% of poverty. It shot up with the recession. The unemployment rate shot up. The unemployment rate came down to full employment. The number of people below 200% did not move. It's a little wave. And, I don't even know what it is now, but I mean with COVID, but that's the issue. People were earning more money, but they weren't earning enough to pay all these bills, shop by themselves, go to a grocery store. And as rents climb, that's going to be the number one spend, and that's the thing that we've got to get very aggressive about building affordable housing. As a guy who did zoning work for 14 years on city council, and Christy could attest to, there's some painful nights I had on Monday nights about people fighting over density of apartment complexes and not in my backyard and all those kind of issues. But, if any community could address that, it's this one. And I think we've got to build that level of how do we do this in a way that people have safe housing, stay stable in the same house, so you're going to the same school with your kids, getting regular access to food that we know will improve your A1Cs and diabetes if we can do that, and hypertension and weight loss. Hence why we're building a food as health strategy. So all of that, it's all interrelated. If we've learned anything, and I think this is what Michael's really helped drive home, is that we're all in this together, organizing the human service functions, because we all do really good work in our silos, and recognizing we're taking in our world, a customer-centric approach. That's the new that has to be built. So we don't look at that, who's suffering and what agency is not getting this and who's not getting. From a person's perspective, I need A, B, and C, and can I collectively do that? And I think the more we unify, the more we have data in the community information exchange that tells us what's going on, and we can dial down in, and we create innovative strategies to address it. That's the lift that we needed to do pre-COVID. It's just gotten exacerbated, and I don't want everybody falling back because of the COVID numbers. That's my advice. we were there before. We're on a pathway. It's just making it more, critical to do it even more now.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. And you raised affordable housing. And so our next panel is about affordable housing. So I think you probably knew that, but we appreciate you and all that you're doing. Michael, everything that you're doing. We certainly look forward to the document that you're going to share with us. As the advisory committee has more questions, I know that we have some board members and other experts, those who provide food pantries and the like on our advisory committee, but we also reserve the right to come back to those who have come before us. And so you're likely to hear from us again as we get into the working groups, especially as we start coming out of this winter situation. 6,500 cases today, not a good news. And so I'm sure we'll be talking again, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Now, we've been joined by Council President Shannon Hardin, and I want to give the Council President an opportunity to say a few words, and then we will move quickly into our housing conversation.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you to everyone in giving your time and doing a lot of work to make sure. Apologize. I'm like my core is to do all my meetings outside, so I apologize. But I'm really interested in this next conversation around housing. Our housing issue is so dynamic. We know that we can't build our way out of it. We know that we can't incentivize our way out of it. We know that it's going to take a layered approach, and that's what we have in front of us. So I'm going to speak this all. I apologize.
Is he coming back or is he finished?
I couldn't tell. It was really hard to hear him, unfortunately. But
No, that sounds like a very large dog.
yeah.
Well, let me introduce the next panel. Carly Booth is the Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. And Carly will address us first, and she will give us an overview of affordable housing. And then Steve Gladman is the leader, president, CEO, all things Affordable Housing Trust for Columbus and Franklin County. I know many of you are familiar with Steve's work as well. By the way, Matt has put his email in the chat if someone wants to send some questions. I also recommend sending questions you might have for Matt directly to Hannah, so we can kind of gather them up and send them over to Matt, make it easy for him. And then Jeff Woda, going back to our panel, is with Woda Cooper Companies. They are a developer, including a developer of affordable housing. So welcome to our panel. Each panelist will have about 10 minutes, and then we'll move into a Q&A portion. Carly, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you all for the opportunity to kind of share what we're seeing and get things kicked off on the housing front. I respect Matt, and I respect, good grief, you're gonna see my nerves really come to life today. But I cannot do a speech like this without a PowerPoint. So I'm working to pull mine up now. And Hannah, if there's any sort of glitch, I'm going to ask for your help. So
Carly, did you forget my name?
I did. I'm sorry. This is a high profile room and I'm trying to keep my cool, man.
My mother-in-law always says I'm very forgetful, so.
I'm sorry, Mike. I hope you can all see my screen. I want to walk through, I think, at the beginning, just a little bit of the data that we're facing, kind of what we see in Columbus right now, but also a little bit of a historic look back of some of the indicators. So how do we move forward here, Hannah? Is there a start, stop, forward, back button? Thank you. And I think Matt alluded to this earlier, but Columbus and Central Ohio generally was in the midst of a housing crisis long before we had coronavirus. 54,000 of our low and moderate income households here in Franklin County paid more than half of their income towards housing. And we've known that's not sustainable. We knew it wasn't sustainable for the families. And now, as we're seeing during COVID-19, it's not sustainable for us as an economy, as a region. Next slide. I want to, and I'm sorry that we're going to have to do the next slide, but I appreciate the help, Hannah. So one of the things that we know that 54,000 number does is it really conceals a pretty significant racial disparity. So if you look at Black households in the Columbus metropolitan area, 55% of those struggle with housing cost burden compared to 43% of their white peers. Next slide. I want to also start digging more into some of the submarkets within housing, and renters in particular, I think, are most precariously positioned right now in COVID-19. The national indicators are suggesting that Ohio as a whole is going to experience 400,000 evictions by the end of January of 2021. For a little bit of context, we had less than 60,000 last year, which would be about a 700% increase. And for a little bit broader perspective, in 2012, which I think a lot of experts kind of peg as the worst year of the worst housing crisis of most of our lifetimes, we had about 85,000 foreclosures. So what we're facing today is a magnitude about fivefold that. And it's going to happen not in the span of a year, but in the span of the next 3 months. Next slide. And again, like some of the other indicators we're looking at, there's a pretty significant racial disparity in how the crisis is being felt and perceived. One of the stronger data points we're looking at right now is this really nice SNAP survey that the Census Bureau does, kind of an instantaneous pulse on the national trends. How do you feel about your ability to pay rent? This came out of the last round of that. It was just at the end of October, and about 1 in 5 white households didn't think they'd be able to pay November's rent. But if you look at Black and Hispanic households, it's nearly twice that, up to about 40%. Next slide, please. That's not just kind of a perception. That's not just a fear of the future. We're seeing that play out in the actual eviction data that comes through Franklin County as well. So we've collaborated with our friends at Legal Aid to say, of the cases that you're handling, of the people who are walking into the front door of the courthouse, what are your demographics? And we're seeing that Black households make up 47% of the eviction defense clients that they serve. Whereas we know from a population standpoint, there are only about 24% of the Franklin County resident base. Next slide, please. Looking at another slice of the housing industry, and I believe that the next one coming up is going to be on purchases and the home buyer market, those who are looking to transition from rental into home ownership. If you could advance the slide, I'd appreciate it. One of the things that we've found is that housing inventory is down significantly year over year. One of the biggest issues here is that K-shaped recovery, where people who are on the wealthier side definitely had an economic blip, but have certainly rebounded in the last few months. But people who are at the lower income spectrum have not, and they kind of continue this descent. Well, all of those people who are in free fall don't really have the luxury of listing their homes because they don't know where they'll be able to purchase their next one. They might not qualify for financing, and it's really constricting the inventory. That in turn is causing our average sales price to shoot through the roof. That's at about $277,000 now. For reference, for a family to be able to afford a purchase home at the average price right now, they'd need to earn about $80,000 a year. Conversely, someone who is earning minimum wage would have to work about 4 full-time jobs just to be able to afford that average home right now. Next slide. We also know that homeowners, those who've achieved home ownership, are not in the strongest financial position. A little bit steadier than renters, in large part because of that K-shaped recovery, also because we've been a lot more aggressive at the national level with interventions. But we are still seeing really troubling indicators. So right now, about 8% of all mortgages that are held by Ginnie Mae, which is the FHA mortgages, so those low and moderate income working class mortgages, about 8% of those are in a forbearance, meaning that they've had some sort of COVID-19 hardship and they're not able to repay. A little bit off from the 11% we saw during the Great Recession, but as Matt kind of alluded to, we don't really know where the end of this is. So it's hard to say exactly how strong that is. Next slide. Another thing that we always want to be really cognizant of is the ability to self-stabilize. So when we are looking at home ownership, you want to look at the amount of equity that that homeowner has, because that really expands the kind of options they have to be able to kind of creatively get out of trouble. This goes all the way back to the 1930s redlining maps. And if you look at homes in Columbus that were in what was considered best neighborhoods in the 1930s, and I use air quotes very intentionally, non-sarcastically there, because it was really just code for white neighborhoods, that average homeowner or that median homeowner has about $425,000 in equity in their home. If you switch over to the Columbus neighborhoods that had previously been considered hazardous, which was code for Black or mixed race, those homeowners have 100,000 in median equity in their homes. So a very different ability to kind of self-manage a crisis when you're looking at those kinds of different equity streams. Next slide, please. We also want to be looking towards the future and kind of how are we building out for our growth. The Building Industry Association of Central Ohio has advised that we need to be building 14,000 units per year just to meet what our projected 2050 population is. So that's not addressing the current backlog. It's not backfilling any of the inadequacies we currently have in the system. That's just meeting growth demand. Even before COVID, we were nowhere near meeting that target. We were building just slightly over 8,000 of those units, and we know that that has slowed significantly as COVID-19 has put into place social distancing on construction sites. It's skewed what the regulatory and approval processes look like now that those have gone digital, and we are also seeing a lot of price fluctuations in the supply and demand markets. So next slide, please. All told, what that's resulted in is that if you look at the households who are coming into our shelter system, about 66% of those are Black families. And again, we compare that to what we know is about 24% of our underlying population base, and you see huge inequities in the system. And we know, again, as Christy, I think, mentioned earlier, that if we don't deal with these very intentionally and very intersectionally in this crisis, as we saw during the Great Recession, those will continue to kind of propagate and go out of control. Next slide. Just a little housing 101, because I don't know how common of knowledge this is. The reason we have this housing gap is not at all complicated. This is like math first grade style. What it costs to build a home, by and large, is not what the average Ohio family can afford. Next slide. That's called the ownership gap, the appraisal gap, the rental gap. Depending on what market you're in, it's a gap. And we have different tools that we can use to close that gap. If you're a relatively well-off family, a middle, upper middle class, usually we can close the gap by reverse engineering or finding just a smaller home, less fancy amenities, so that you are just right sizing to what you can afford. As you go down the income ladder, you have to get more aggressive in your strategies to be able to get people into either home ownership or into rental housing. That could include low-cost debt, either for the purchaser, the tenant, or the construction company. And after that, your options essentially become some iteration of a subsidy. When you're looking at Columbus, we certainly have some version of each of these different stabilizers, but what we don't have is the scale we need to meet demand. So right now, for every 27 families, for every 100 families that need affordable housing, only 27 of them get it. So we are far short of what our goals and needs are. Next slide. So that's scary. That's a lot of data that is very bleak. I'm not going to be able to sugarcoat that, but I will say too that, you know, I'm not a doomsday prepper. I don't have a bunch of beanie weenies in my basement and flashlights. And one of the reasons for that is housing is an incredibly well-proven strategy to recover from major economic downturns. And in fact, it's been the vehicle to get us out of every major recession for probably the last 100 years. Next slide. And one of the reasons for that is because housing is one of the most intersectional industries you will ever find. What it takes to put a house in the ground on High Street implicates so many industries and sectors that you are just driving economic growth. And not only that, but it's hyper localized. You have local labor using local products to create local assets that are then immovable. And that's why there are a lot of people who've called housing America's most famous industry, America's most localized industry. Forbes called it the most American industry in the world. Next slide. I'll also just allude to the fact that there's a million pieces of data and research studies that back that up. I'm happy to share any one of those with you. I've created a little bit of a snapshot here, but I think the one that always resonates for me is there was a recent study of the Ohio Housing Trust Fund program, which is one of Ohio's scarce but awesome gap filler programs for the construction of new affordable housing. And they found a $12 economic impact for every dollar spent by the government. And then if you take that and you look at the same dynamics in terms of local government income, wages, net revenue, job growth, all of those same indicators are kind of replicated throughout as you increase government spending on affordable housing. Next slide, please. I want to be really cognizant of my time, so I'm going to breeze through these next few slides here, but I think that housing is interesting enough and a big deal enough that I like to be able to talk about where some of those levers are that we can pull to influence this landscape. So next slide. And I'm going to start off with construction, because I think closing the construction gap and building new housing and preserving existing affordable housing is one of those really yet untapped wealth springs that we have to help move us forward economically and to stabilize where we've been. One of the things that I find so appealing about this is, as a state, we have about $3 billion in unused volume cap that just the state of Ohio every year. And with comes tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars of tax credits that just sit on the table. And that's because we don't have the local leveraging programs to be able to go out and grab them. It's low-hanging fruit in that in Columbus, we have the infrastructure to do that. We have the capacity to do it. We just need the capital to do it. Other very acquisition and building construction heavy things that we could look at are property acquisition strategies to make sure that affordable housing developers are able to go out and get good quality land in good quality communities. Looking at ways that we can expand single family development, make it easier to build homes for that mid-market price point, especially infill development, and ways that we can partner with peers across the state to advocate for better resources for all of this. And one of the things you're going to hear for sure in the next few weeks is advocacy for a state tax credit program, because there's a lot of momentum behind it right now. Next slide. We can't, I'm going to skip this because it's November, it's Columbus. I'm not talking about Ann Arbor today, but just put it on your radar that they're doing cool things and they cannot outbeat us on this. So in addition to the sticks and bricks, it's really important to talk about people and about strengthening the safety net. One of the things among many that Columbus absolutely should be proud of during COVID and in our response to it is standing up the Impact Hope Fund, which was this emergency rent relief eviction prevention fund. And it went from 0 to 60 pretty much overnight, and it's fantastic. But we need to make it permanent. People got sick before COVID. People lost their job before COVID. Whether we're talking about a national health crisis or a personal one, we need to have that standing infrastructure to make sure that these tragedies don't result in homelessness, which we know clogs up the rest of the system. It's bad for the families and it's bad for us as a whole. Next slide. One of the other things I also want to call attention to is where Columbus has already really started to make a name for itself nationally, which is taking very intensive housing supports and pairing them up with economically mobile strategies. So one of these to highlight is called Success Bridge. Research spearheaded by Columbus State Community College found that 14% of students going through their program experienced homelessness in a given year. 14% of those college students literally homeless in a year. What we are doing is we are pairing a housing subsidy with long-term intense academic counseling, financial aid counseling, career counseling, so that what we can do is stabilize that student and get them through college and put them out in the world on the right foot, where we can then make sure that they're going through their life and their career self-sufficiently, which is great for the student and the family. It's great for drawing in employers into Columbus. And this is the kind of program that is just replicable up one wall and down another. Next slide, please. And next slide as well. So I think anytime we're talking about constrained budget eras, we also have to talk about policies that have a little less of a financial hit that we can kind of weave within the capital programs. Columbus is very well positioned to lead again nationally on a lot of these issues. And the one I want to call attention to quickly is kind of the green tape mentality. And I do mean that as a mentality shift to how we approach affordable housing development, which should be this, yes, we can get it done kind of attitude. Instead of throwing up red tape, throwing up barriers, adding time to the process, adding cost to the process, how can we get ourselves in a community space to just be better at saying yes and getting them done? And with that, I think talking about zoning modernization and bringing our 1950 era zoning code up to the speed of where we are as a community today is really inherent in doing that. And there's a lot of other really great policy initiatives we can look at as well, and I'll let you review these after the presentation. Next slide. I want to make sure that my colleagues on the panel have plenty of time, so I'm going to skip this slide. Thank you, Hannah. But I think the question is to why housing now? I just want to call attention to the fact that Columbus is so well invested when it comes to housing. We are already a national hub for affordable housing developers, for affordable housing owners, and for affordable housing investors. We've got the service partners, we've got the P3 partnerships. Everybody who you want to have at the table has their HQ already in Columbus. So we're the space to do this. So with that, I'm gonna shush. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Christy was having some technical issues with her unmute, and I was trying to do it override. So I will just turn it over to Jeff for the next conversation about housing.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to participate today. I'm Jeff Loden, one of the principals at Loden Cooper Companies. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, we're a vertically integrated, employee-owned housing development company. We are headquartered here in Columbus. We've been in business, this is our 30th year. We design, develop, build, and manage affordable housing. We have over 4,000 units in Ohio and over 13,000 units in our portfolio, which in different states. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is how has COVID impacted affordable housing? And a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is operating the housing after it's developed, but also I have some construction details to share with you. And the biggest challenge that we see are the additional steps now required to accomplish almost any task. Due to the precautions we are taking prior to entering units to complete work orders, we always have to make sure that we use good standards as far as PPP. Initially, we were very hampered by the lack of availability for our staff of safety and cleaning products. And as time has gone on, safety products have become more available, but now construction products that we need are much harder to find in a timely fashion. The COVID restrictions have really limited management's ability to perform routine maintenance in units. So we're probably creating a backlog of service needs and expenditures, which I think is hurting the quality of our housing. A lot of our families are in the workforce that have part-time and service jobs, which have been highly impacted. That has created an increase in numerous late payments, lack of payments as a result of this job loss or reduced work hours. And as we've had various moratoriums of eviction, we're now creating a potential tidal wave of evictions once the moratoriums end. And we're creating for our residents a huge amount of bad debts, legal expense, et cetera. There has been some emergency limited temporary rental assistance. I think Carly mentioned the specific program that we had here in Columbus. Our own company provided over $150,000 in rental assistance to our residents in conjunction with our partners, but it's still too little. It's not permanent, and we still have many households that are in need of that assistance. Another big issue that you probably don't think about when you think about affordable housing is the requirements on an operator or a management company. We just don't simply take the word of a household that they income qualify. We have a very stringent process that we go through to certify that those residents meet the income limits. So, as you can imagine, in the midst of a pandemic, we exchange with residents to show that they have met the income limits, and the normal flow of the required verification paperwork has been greatly inhibited because of the scare of passing COVID from management to residents. Our availability of maintenance vendors has been reduced substantially in these COVID times, which means it now takes us longer to turn a vacant unit into an occupied unit with a huge backlog and a huge waiting list for residents. So that's been very challenging. How can we get the units up and ready when we don't have near the maintenance staff, we don't have the third-party vendors available that we did pre-COVID? We have 4 housing developments under construction in the Columbus market, and one's on the far east, one's on the far west, and everywhere in between. And our construction division is experiencing great interruptions in their workforce. If a particular subcontracting crew, if someone gets COVID, that means typically then that entire crew quarantines because they've been working together. And we just kind of did a look back to get ready for this presentation. And every project we have had has had about a 2-week issue every 2 months. So about a week a month, we're averaging in a delay due to COVID. Most times this affects the critical path. As you know, if you have a certain subcontractor that's relying on the next subcontractor, we take a week out a month, then everything gets delayed exponentially, lengthening projects and compounding delays due to late adjustments of schedules. Construction materials are being delayed, and delays are often not predictable and are not identified in time to find alternate solutions while keeping schedules on track. How can you predict that a member of the HVAC crew is going to get COVID when they've just started their work, then the whole team goes? Again, it's just been impossible to predict who and what is going to interrupt our flow of work. Materials that we have found that have been very difficult to get during this: insulation, drywall, hardware, light fixtures, windows, lumber, and the most difficult of all has been appliances. And I'll talk a little bit more about appliances later on. So those are some big picture issues that COVID has kind of interrupted our flow of work overall. And then I tried to look at what has COVID, how has it impacted us specifically in Columbus and Franklin County? And again, as Carly said, the response by the city with some provisions for temporary rental assistance have been great, but it's not sufficient. As she noted, it's temporary, it's not a permanent nature, but it has been a help. So we're very fortunate to have the city do that, and we're thankful for that, as is many of our residents. Columbus residents are at a heightened precautionary level in compliance with regulation level than our rural projects, where the higher infection rate is here in the more populated area. We have several residents who have self-quarantined, and many times they're openly, and I mean openly, chastising anyone else in the community without proper PPP on when they're in the building. We've kind of become like almost hall monitors of what's going on between some of our residents. As I mentioned earlier, when we're doing these verifications and tenant certifications, it's very important to get the documentation to prove that the households meet the items. We opened a property on Livingston about a month ago, and we're getting ready to open a property over on the Hilltop, and getting the documents and the verifications so that those households can be approved and get moved into brand new affordable housing has been extremely challenging. So for instance, you know, you have a senior occupant to be at the Livingston. Now, instead of saying, print your bank statement or get a copy and bring it in, we don't want that hand-to-hand contact with documents. Now we're saying you need to go online, download it from your bank account, email it to us, go online, get your Social Security award letter off of their website. And as you can imagine, especially for our senior population, now trying to automate all of that, which they've never done before, is an obvious struggle for them when it comes to getting us what we need to get them qualified to be in their unit. Construction labor challenges here in the Columbus market, again, has just been extremely challenging for certain trades. Locally, the Columbus aware aging requirements require front control ranges in all of our units. And we have just found that they're simply not available throughout the country. So we're continually given dates by suppliers, and we can't get the appliances. I mean, it's crazy things like that that you never would think that COVID has interrupted. But we've actually bought temporary ranges to put in units with the agreement that when we can get the compliant ranges, we'll switch them out. I think we have 39 or 40 units that we're really struggling to make good on the commitments that we've made. Not only do we have shortages with materials, subcontractors and labor forces, and then not only do we have trouble getting the labor, but when you get the labor, if we have workspace that we're asking them to go finish this unit, due to social distancing that we've implemented on our job sites, we can only have so many workers in that unit at a time versus our standard procedure prior to COVID, which would be to get those crews in there, get the work done, and keep moving as quickly as possible to get those units complete. Finally, here in Franklin County, we've had a very hard time moving cases through the court system. And probably the most unique that I think you all could appreciate is we have a resident that's just abandoned the unit, but they're still under the lease. We have to go through the formal process. I'm sorry. I thought I heard somebody asking something. Excuse me. So, you know, we want to get that unit turned over as quickly as possible to a qualifying tenant. And that has caused us to have units sit and not be leased to any household, which you can imagine is very frustrating as an operator. Some disparities that we've seen due to COVID is tenants who miss rent payments in affordable housing are not often able to make those payments later on. And I think what we've seen kind of in the market rate world is residents have been given an opportunity to kind of defer and then catch up. Well, in our households, that's probably and more realistically just not possible, and the scenario is just going to worsen as time goes on. You know, I asked one of our managers of our communities here in Columbus, you know, what are some disparities that you've seen for our residents due to COVID? And I thought she made some interesting points. Let me read to you what one of our people on the ground had said. There's been a large focus on the economic shutdown, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Our seniors and disabled households have had a lot of emotional impacts and lifestyle disruptions. Those that traditionally need hands-on assistance and face-to-face interactions are left trying to go at it on their own. They've had no human contact due to COVID. We're getting more requests to help with very simple tasks, cable internet issues, programming cell phones. How do I put in my password for my cell phone, setting up online payments, login problems, and a multitude of other technology-related requests. They really have nobody else to ask. No one else can come to the unit. So our on-site managers have kind of become their counselors in helping them with daily routine tasks. In addition, since they're high-risk groups, they're isolated in dealing with depression and boredom. We have residents that'll just come to the community manager's office just because they have nowhere else to go and no one else to talk to. I think our managers have done a great job understanding this, and I think they're trying everything they can, but obviously they are not trained professionals in this field. They're trained to manage affordable rental housing, not to deal with some of the issues that our residents are dealing with. Our population has also had a large request for emotional support animals over the last few months. We've seen an exponential increase in that request, and that's probably a good thing that they're trying to address some of the issues I described earlier. Another disparity that we have seen is quality, high-speed internet with the necessary hardware. Look how we're communicating right now. If you are a low-income resident and you don't have high-speed internet with a computer that is able to use Zoom or WebEx, how are you communicating in today's world? So that is a big issue that we have seen. That's a disparity really hurting the lower income population during COVID. So again, as Carly said, in respect for time, I have another couple pages here, but I'll cut it short. And hopefully sharing some of those issues that we're dealing with during the COVID pandemic is hopefully educational for you. One thing I can add, Carly talked about some of the resources available. We are under construction on one of those tax exempt 4% deals that we were able to utilize some soft funds through the city, which came through Steve Gladman's group, that we're under construction on right now. And we have 2 more housing developments proposed for here in Franklin County that are using some of those other resources that Carly described that haven't been really used for new construction. We're slowly figuring out ways to use them, but if we could get a fix to that 4% credit rate and that state housing tax credit, it really would increase the amount of new affordable housing exponentially. So thank you again for your time, and I'm happy to stay around after Steve presents for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to turn it over to Steve. You might have some feedback. I have to use my phone. Sorry, you guys. Steve Gladman?
It looks like Steve had to hop off. I know he was participating in a city council hearing that began at 5 this evening with Councilmember Dorn. So I think at this point we can probably open it up to questions. I know we're short on time, but if people want to stay a couple extra minutes, we may have a few minutes for questions.
That's not so much a question if I raise my hand. I think more of just a statement in the stuff. It's been fascinating to hear, like Shannon was talking about before, just hearing about the affordable housing issue, the housing issues in general. I've known a bit about kind of the lack of pace of construction and all that. And it was interesting to hear all the eviction numbers. So I just know personally, as this committee evolves and doing things, because I have a lot of background in real estate and a big interest in that, I would certainly love to be a part of whatever kind of subcommittee things break out, to have the opportunity to be working on those particular areas especially. But it was very useful and helpful information.
I do have a question. I'm not sure if Matt's still on, but it's probably still applicable also to the housing conversation. In addition to my day job at Gibbon, I'm on the Women's Fund Board and the Columbus Women's Commission, and I'm curious about, both from a food standpoint and a housing standpoint, we've heard a lot about how COVID has been the she session and how it's disproportionately impacting women, especially women of color. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about either the food insecurity and or the housing piece through a gender lens, and how specifically women are being impacted in our community.
So I can't speak to the food security perspective, but for housing, we are seeing that same trend. And I think one of the things that backs into that data is the job loss and underemployment statistics. They're more likely to be affected by wait staff, retail staff, early in careers, careers that have been interrupted due to childbirth and to family responsibilities. So a lot of the things that we would see in the unemployment numbers are just being replicated then and kind of carried down and passed through to the housing numbers. I would also say too that even before COVID-19, one of Matthew Desmond's favorite quotes, and I'm going to try not to murder it too much, but the way that incarceration is the plague of the Black population, the Black male population, of victims really unduly and unfairly target Black women. And again, you're seeing that replicated COVID-19 as well.
Yeah, and Heather, Christy, I would add, obviously the housing data, we have a lot more demographic data, but I think because Matt doesn't have the demographic data at this point with the tracking system he uses, he won't have that, but that's something that he's striving to have. He has census tract data, but he doesn't have the specific, and Ariana's on his board, she knows as well. So, I just jumped in here. He won't have the gender breakdown as of yet, Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Carly. Steve, we'll catch him up and bring him in another segment or another time. Certainly thank you to Matt and to Michael Corey as well. As I said before, this won't be the last time we discuss these issues. We will definitely be breaking out, as you know, the way the schedule works, we'll break out into smaller groups to take deeper dives into these issues. So we, as we said earlier, we like to reserve the right to bring panelists back along with the experts and those that are doing the work that are on the advisory committee. So we will have many more opportunities to discuss these issues. And Carly, if you wouldn't mind, if you would share your PowerPoint with Hannah, that would be great so that we could all have it, so that we can refer back to it when we get to that point in our work. We would appreciate it. And obviously, I know you'll be updating those numbers because I think we're all going to see, we may see some things change after the first of the year as we get into our working group. So thank you so much. And for all of our members today, thank you for being with us and thank you for struggling through some of the technology difficulties. I don't know what happened, but this is the world we live in. And so we will be together, I believe it is on November 18th, where we are scheduled to discuss small business. And then we have a panel that is coming before us, but we also have a number of small business leaders, both from the Chamber of Commerce, entrepreneurs, Stephanie Hightower, who is funding a number of small business initiatives. So we will have a robust conversation. That's the only panel we will have next week. But yet we have several people on the advisory committee that do this work, and then we will obviously hear from our panel. So I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thank you for your time and enjoy this 80-degree weather out there.
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you.
Thank
See you all later. Take care.
Bye-bye.